and welcome to Narayana IS Academy, your one-stop destination for making UPSC dream a reality. I extend you a warm welcome to the masterclass where we shall be discussing art and culture topics that were in the news, that were in prominence throughout the previous few months. So these questions, these topics clearly have a possibility of featuring in the upcoming UPSC Prelims on 25th May 2025, and hence let's quickly see these topics once. Let's pick up important clues from here, and these questions are highly expected in the upcoming examination. So before we begin the first topic, let me quickly also show you the broad number of questions that come from art and culture every year in the UPSC Prelims exam. So should you have a look on your screen, you would see that in the last few years, the weightage of art and culture questions has been quite variable. Anywhere from 4 to 10 questions on an average can be expected from this domain. Now, art and culture and Indian history happen to be extremely overlapping. So many of the art and culture topics you might interestingly happen to cover when you study ancient and medieval India. At the same time, there are certain specific topics, say for example talking about festivals celebrated across India, talking about temple architecture. Now ever since the Ram Mandir at Ayodhya has been inaugurated, there is a massive possibility of questions coming from temple architecture in it. Apart from that, we have topics ranging from various kinds of classical dances to music to art. And therefore, art and culture presents a completely and entirely separate domain away from Indian history. And no wonder, as you can see here, back in 2023, you had around 7 questions exclusively from Indian art, architecture and culture. Similarly, back in 2024, it was 4. Once again, if we talk about a little more previous scenario, then 5, 4, 3, 7. So on an average, if we were to do a broad estimation, from 4 to 10, any amount of questions can come. Now, that's quite a weightage, of course. And having said that, let's also remember that India is an extremely polycultural society. Now, whenever we talk about Indian art and culture, it's good to remember that India is a very unique society because India has an extremely lengthy heritage. Apart from that, we are also very diverse. We are also very multifaceted when it comes to our culture. I think the biggest unique thing which stands Indian society apart and tall is the fact that we are characterized by massive cultural heterogeneity. Various states, various regions, various cultures, and then the subcultures. So of course, talking about art and culture, today I am presenting in front of you an amalgamation of myriad topics. As I said, some extent to the temple architecture of India. Of course, we shall give a separate and a very special reference to UNESCO. Of late, many non-tangible, many cultural, many historically important sites have also found recognition by UNESCO, all of them hailing from Indian Culture Society. So we must quickly have a look at those. Which are the ones who have been honored by the UNESCO recently? We should also talk about, therefore, tribal art, tribal dance, tribal music. So of course, this is a very interesting, a very colorful topic. And now quickly let's start with the very first topic that I want to talk about. And yes, we will begin with temple architecture, temple art, the kinds of temple architectures which have been predominant in India since the historical times. And the context, why are we even talking about the temple architecture? That's because on 22nd January 2024, India made headlines across the world as we inaugurated our special Ram Temple in Ayodhya. Now, not only was this a very significant development in terms of India's religion, in terms of India's heritage, it showcased Indian solidarity in front of the world podium, but also talking from the perspective of art and culture, let's also be aware of certain architectural highlights. What were the unique architectural designs that were used to make the temple, and how are they relevant for the upcoming UPSC exam? So talking about the style of temple architecture, now, India broadly has 3 styles of temple architecture. Of course, we talk about the Nagara temple architecture that's associated with northern Indian heritage. Then, of course, we talk about the Dravida architecture. And then there is another one that's more associated with the Madhya Pradesh belt. That's mostly the central Indian region, and that's known as the Visara. So here quickly let's touch upon all of these, and coming back to the Ram temple specifically, this corresponds to the Nagara style of architecture. Talking about this style, let's also understand that something that really set the temple very unique and very aesthetically pleasing also was the fact that a lot of pink sandstone has been used in constructing this beautiful monument. It's a 3-storied monument, of course, situated in such a critically dimensional manner that it's about 250 wide and 161 feet high. So all in all, we cover an area of 2.67, close to about 3 acres of land has been constructed upon in the temple. And also another very good thing to notice here would be that talking about the pink sandstone. Now, of course, whenever we talk about the belt of Rajasthan, whenever we talk about the belt of, say, Jaipur, typically we see that there's a lots of red sandstone architecture that we have seen in the very Rajputana architectural style. So here as well you could notice that this pink sandstone was specifically procured from Mirzapur and Bansi Paharpur regions. Now good to remember, of course, because as I always say, UPSC is a very multifaceted exam. What we need to remember whenever we study something that's interdisciplinary is that always use a map and always use an image in front of you. That's the whole beauty of even online learning, by the way, that visual imagery really helps you in remembering information. So, for example, here we are presenting the entire image of the temple architecture. So when we discuss in detail about where is the mandap exactly, where is the shikhar of the temple, where is the entrance dwar of the temple. So I think when you look at the image, you are able to have a very 3D kind of a realistic image out of it, and then you remember it longer. Similarly, talking about the pink sandstone, now this is something you must remember, that this was the primary raw material that went into making the architecture, and where did it come from? So it's a very good thing to actually have a look at the map. Always relate your geography to history, to art and culture. That's the best way of remembering everything in a small capsule. Okay, so these were the places the sandstone has been procured from. And now talking about the sheer massive spread of the entire temple, we could say that about 390 pillars were constructed here. There are about 46 doorways and 5 mandaps which act as the entry point to the temple. Now, having said that, the most important region of the temple happens to be the Garbhagriha. Now, whenever we talk about temple architecture, remember that across India, there is a thread of similarity, of course. Like most Indian styles, whether it's Nagara, Visara or Dravida, you would notice that Garbhagriha, Mandap, Shikhara or Gopurams. Gopurams are more specifically the Deccan Indian style, but majority of the styles are very overlapping. There is just a difference of which part of the temple is placed at which part. Say for example, in the southern Indian trend of temple architecture, it was very common to have a lake, a water body inside the temple. Similarly, extremely tall Gopurams were also observed here for a very long time in history. So these keen observations are important. That would help you differentiate between the Dravida and the Nagara architecture style. Having said this, the Garbhagriha happens to be the most vital, the most crucial element of temple architecture, because this is the place which always houses the divine idol of the deity to which the temple has been created for, to which the temple has been, to whom the temple has been dedicated. So here we could say that the Ram Lala idol has been put in the Garbhagriha, the central, the heart of the temple that we are referring to. Now talking about how was it such a massive innovation? Innovation because this is a very important highlight of the Ram Mandir architecture, in fact, that this was done in the form of an anointment. Anointment as in the entire temple was actually adorned by, decorated by using mirrors, lenses to celebrate the occasion of Ram Navami. Similarly, let's remember that, now here's a name that you must remember for the upcoming examinations, and this is Shri Arun Yogiraj, because the 51-inch massive divine idol was actually crafted, it was curated by this gentleman. So let's remember the name Shri Arun Yogiraj, quite an important name there. Similarly, talking about the durability, talking about how long do we expect such a massive, such a beautifully curated architecture to really last. So we could say it is designed in such a way that the durability says that it could actually last for a millennium long. And the most interesting thing is that we do not see use of iron. Iron, often associated with lots of durability and tensile strength, is not something that has gone into making the temple. So that also sets it quite apart actually. And now let's also quickly understand then what do we even mean by the Nagara format of architecture, temple architecture more specifically. So the Nagara temple architecture style, as we just discussed, is more predominant in the northern Indian belt. Now, what are the unique features which segregate it from other styles? One very important thing is that this specifically emerged around the 5th century CE during the Gupta period. Now, let's not forget, of course, that Gupta period was also referred to as the golden age for India. One primary reason for that was economic growth and beautiful, breathtaking architecture and breathtaking art, construction that was predominant during this time. So it's good to remember, therefore, that we can obviously relate this with the mnemonic of the golden age of Indian history, that it was during the Gupta period that the Nagara form actually took shape. Second thing to remember is that these are a list of architectural features we typically associate with the Nagara temple design. So these are a shikhar. As the name suggests, shikhar symbolizes the structure that shows like a tower, the tower-like structure that we often talk about associated with temples and such historical monuments. So this is almost like a massive apex shape that comes over the sanctum sanctorum. Sanctum sanctorum is synonymous to the Garbhagriha, where the idol of the Lord is situated. Just above that, you see this massive tall kind of towering construction. That's referred to as the shikhar. Now, very, very predominant style in the Nagara theme. Similarly, you have a raised plinth. When I say raised plinth, let's also understand that the temples are created in such a way that they are raised on a platform. You could see the image here. The image here talks volumes about what we are discussing. So the temple is not touching the ground really. There is an elevated podium, like a stage on which the temple has been created as such. This is what we mean by the plinth, the raised plinth. Now, talking about the raised plinth, of course, layout is equally important. Let's remember that the temple provides for a space for circumambulation. Now, in many, many religions, including Buddhism, including Hinduism, we know that the devotees are supposed to circumambulate. They are supposed to take a circle tour of the entire temple, of the entire Garbhagriha. It's a very revered way of worshipping. So something similar is here as well, and the temple has provided a massive pathway for circumambulation for the devotees, all across where the sanctum sanctorum is situated. And then there are many, many mandapas. Now, mandapas are massive halls. Of course, there are many religious activities, ceremonies, traditions that take place in these temples. Of course, there is also a provision of making prasada, there is distribution, there is also a place for storing all the very, very important religious, you can say, raw materials which are gone later into the proceedings. So all that is taken care of through these massive mandapas. And now talking about the decoration, of course, it is breathtaking because there are elaborate murals. Murals are wall designs. There are elaborate murals, there are elaborate adornation of the temple that has been done in such a way that it absolutely arouses divinity. Of course, it is aesthetically very, very pleasing. And having said that, there are actually 5 modes, rather I could say 5 dimensions of the Nagara style temple architecture. Now, what are these? Let's remember, one is known as the Vallabhi. In the Vallabhi subtype, now you could also question that exactly what do we mean by the dimension or the modes of Nagara architecture. So we are talking about subtypes. Now, every broad category could have certain variations in construction, because we know that majority of temples in India are coming as a part of Indian history. They've been there for us. It's a part of a material heritage since, say, the ancient Indian history period. Having said that, of course, every dynasty, whichever has created these temples, has done some addition or some new innovation. So that's why we have subtypes within the Nagara broad type. And one is Vallabhi, as I said. Here, typically, we see a very barrel kind of roof. The next one would be the Thamsana. The Thamsana one talks about how we have the multi-eaved towers and kind of a slab piling. You might have seen sometimes in temples, it's a very common sight. As I spoke about the shikhar, now here in these styles, the shikhar comes in the form like this. Almost like a small staircase or slab-like structure. That's known as Thamsana. A very interesting thing to do would be to actually see images of various temples in India. Or if any of you wants to watch a documentary, then of course there are tremendous Government of India documentaries. Even we have it on our platform. There has been sufficient coverage on temple architecture. You could actually see those videos to have a more visual understanding of what I'm talking about. Then of course you have the Latina. Here we talk about a single slightly curved tower. You could see a tower that's almost coming like a dome. Okay, across northern India. It's very, very common. I mean, I think you can relate to it as well. Then of course we talk about the Shikhari subtype. In Shikhari subtype you have a massive shikhar, a massive dome above the temple associated with sub-spires. There are kind of a tiring like structure that they provide. Similarly, you have the Bhumija. In the Bhumija, you can talk about miniature spires, quite much like Shikhari, but they're slightly smaller, they're slightly more sleek in a grid pattern on each face of the shikhar. So as the shikhar is there, on every side of the shikhar you will have some small spires being created. So these are the broad subtypes. Now normally the questions will not exactly pinpoint you these subtypes, but it's very important to know because they can always give you a very confusing question. They can say that to which form of architectural style can we associate the Bhumija subtype to, or they could give you a question deliberately to confuse you, that is Bhumija an extension of the Dravida or the Visara subtype. So no, please remember all these are subtypologies of the Nagara style architecture. That's why just remember the names broadly. Now let's just elaborate the discussion a little more by seeing, in that case, what's the broad difference between the three types I had told you. The Nagara, of course, we've just seen, the Ram Mandir is a standing icon. Then what about the Dravida and the Visara? First, let's see the geographical extent of each. Of course, the Nagara style is associated with northern India, you know that. Similarly, the Dravida style corresponds to the peninsula, the southern Indian belt. Now, what about Visara? As I said, the Deccan region in India, the middle part in India, the central part corresponding to say Madhya Pradesh, you could talk about Karnataka, Maharashtra belt, that all comes in the Visara style. Therefore, it also is known as the Deccan style of architecture. Let's not get too much in the nitty gritty, but let's understand the basic difference between each. Now, the first thing is after geography. See, the perfect way of studying is always taking history and geography together. If somebody would ask me, could you thoroughly study the national parks in India? I would say no until I have a map with me. Or if somebody would ask me, would you really study in detail the Indian national movement? I would say no until I have a map with me. So the thing is that whenever you study a historical event, whether it's art architecture, whether it's a national movement, or whether it's your Mughal dynasty, or whether you're talking about the Indus Valley Civilization, the best thing is to always keep a modern map with you too. Generally, we always keep the ancient maps. No, do keep that, but also keep a modern Indian map, or the world map really. So it really helps you because with a pencil or with a pen you can keep marking what you're studying. It's help you in spatial positioning of what you read. You know, you can associate geographically with whatever you're studying right now. So just take a map and try to mark that Nagara is northern Indian, where is Vesara, which states would come under Vesara. So this is a beautiful way of remembering, and you'll be amazed to see you'll never forget this then. Now, after doing a map work comes the time period. Now, this is pretty historical. So now we are talking about the temporal aspect of it. We are seeing the history of time. So talking about Nagara style, of course, we just saw it's 5th century CE, specifically the Gupta period. Please don't forget that this style typically emerged during Gupta period because I told you a hint also that Gupta was the golden age of Indian history. Okay. Now similarly the Dravida style. The Dravida style is associated with the 7th century CE and more associated with the Pallavas. Now easy to remember because Pallava art and architecture is again a very predominant theme in Indian history. So do remember that since they are the leaders of such prominent architectural monuments in India, of course Dravida style also has been found under their aegis. Now talking about the Deccan style, the Visara style, this came much later, that's around 8th century. Now you could ask me why did it come so late? The natural answer is that because Visara is showing a mix. It's a hybridized design which is taking some design, some theme from the Nagara, some from the Dravida. So all in all it's an amalgamation. Okay, it's a mixed pot of both these and therefore it came later by a blend of both these. So therefore 5th, 7th and 8th, please remember. Okay, now next thing to remember is that which states typically represent the Dravida style, because Nagara is entire North India. So talking about the Dravida style, of course you can associate this more with Tamil Nadu. You know Tamil Nadu is extremely rich in terms of its temple monuments. So that's Dravida style. Similarly, talking about the Visara, the mixed style, the Deccan style, it's more corresponding to your Andhra, Maharashtra, Karnataka, of course southern Madhya Pradesh as well. Okay, let's remember. Now, let's see the main features, more important. As we just saw in the Dravida style, we can talk about things that are slightly different from the Nagara style. Nagara we've already seen in the Ram Temple discussion. So talking about the Dravida style now, these are characterized by pyramid-like towers. Pyramid-like towers, you know how pyramids look. They are extremely tall and they are tapering. like a huge inverted cone. Similarly, here you have pyramidal towers known as the Vimmana. That's very important, please remember, Vimmana. Okay, now next important thing to remember is the rectangular plan inside the temple. That's referred to as the mandapa and pillared hall. Okay, as we discussed the Nagara style, I told you that there is a massive space provided for deities, deity circumambulation, where devotees can keep walking and circumambulating in a circular manner. So there you have the halls called mandaps. Remember, here also you have massive halls, but these are very complex in design. Why? Because there are too many of them, and they have boundary walls outside each. So these would be the mandapas really. And then talking about the pillared, massive pillar usage is there in the Dravida style. Now this could definitely differentiate it a bit from the Nagara style. That pillar usage is tremendous, extreme. There's one more point of differentiation, as I mentioned earlier, that's the Gopuram. Now, a very interesting thing that happened in the southern Indian history was that Gopurams were always there. Just like in the North temples, in the Nagara style, you had the Shikhar. I showed you an image also. Above the temple, you have a large dome like this. That's a Shikhar. But in South India, the tendency became such that every king who would come to power would keep on adding more and more floors to the Gopuram, just to add to the beauty and the more, you could say, the grace of the temple. So which means temples eventually started having massive Gopuram. It was like a huge towering structure, you know. Awe-inspiring, absolutely. And all of them were beautifully carved with various themes and very colorful. That's a very distinctive feature of the Dravidian style, by the way. So they have massive Gopuram, large gateways, absolutely, and extremely important towers called Vimmana. So these three things are very different. The Vimmana, the Gopuram, and of course we talk about the massive mandaps with pillars. Pillar usage is tremendous here. Now the third variety is Visara. Visara, as I said, is a mix of both. So in Visara we see a combination, of course, of both the styles. The Shikhar that is above the temple is a medium height one. It's not exactly as massive as the Shikhars of Northern Indian style, or for that matter the Vimanas or the Gopurams of the South Indian style. It's not that massive. It's slightly more low in its height, in its entire shape. Similarly, we could say that the Shikhar here is star shaped. That's a very distinctive style. So please remember, the star shaped Shikhar is associated with the mixed Visara style. Again, these are quite richly ornated, very well decorated. Now let's see a few examples to remember better. Now talking about the Nagara style, you have the Khandariya Mahadev temple. Similarly, you have the Khajuraho, the Sun temple. Similarly, you talk about the Konark Lingaraj temple in Odisha, Bhubaneswar. Okay, and please also remember that in the Nagara style, as we were just discussing the temple at Ayodhya, there is a massive usage of sandstone. Like in the temple that we spoke about, we saw the pink sandstone from Mirzapur. So remember the sandstone usage. Similarly, coming to Dravida style, you have the Brihadeshwara temple. You have the Meenakshi temple. Of course, you have the Shore temple Mahabalipuram, one of its epitome of the Deccan style, the epitome of the Dravida style. Then of course, talking about the Visara style, you have the Hoysaleshwara temple, you have the Halbidu temple, you have the Virupaksh temple. And then talking about the material of construction, in the Deccan one, in the mixed one, you see variety of materials. Remember, if it's a blend of both styles, it also uses many raw materials as a blend. It's completely hybrid in design as well as raw material. It's using soapstone, granite, sandstone. But talking about the Dravida style, it is more of granite, laterite, soapstone, so slightly different from the northern style. That's primarily sandstone. Now, coming about culturally, how important are these? Of course, all these represent Indian heritage in a massive way. Now, talking about the Nagara style, it emphasizes on verticality. Verticality as in something that is going up, which it is symbolizing to human beings reaching to the deity, just an above reach. Vertically, it's towering. Talking about the Dravida style, it shows a mountain-like structure, a cosmic divine mountain, okay, because it is almost enclosed as it goes up. Talking about the blend of both the styles, in some temples you see a kind of verticality, in some other temples you might see a kind of cosmic mountain structure. But again, as I said, all these three have been responsible for the unique temple architecture in India. So do remember all these three styles, remember when they emerged, remember which dynasty was primarily responsible, remember the examples of each, and also do remember exactly geographically where these are, and one or two distinctive features about their architecture. That's enough. Now with that, let's move to the second topic, and now we are talking about how the union government had actually given massive loans under the scheme called Special Assistance to states and union territories for capital investment into what? To develop the Ramapa region as a specific tourist circuit known as the Sustainable Tourist Circuit. Circuit is a specific area. Now let's therefore talk a little bit about the Ramapa Temple. Talking about the Ramapa Temple, it is also known as the Rudreshwara Temple, very revered temple dedicated to Lord Shiva in Telangana state. Now with that, let's also remember the style of architecture, please, that's crucial. This is the Kakatiya style of architecture. As I said, within a broad domain, even within the Dravida domain, there are some variations because every dynasty presented its own variation to the existing style. So this is the Kakatiya style. Now that reminds me of a very famous queen from Kakatiya dynasty. Who was she? Who was so brave that she had actually defeated enemies and she had protected her kingdom. Who was that Kakatiya queen that I'm talking about? So if you know the name, do post it on the comment and I'd love to hear from you. Okay, so in this style, we see developing around 1213 AD under the patronage of a very famous ruler from Kakatiya kingdom known as Ganapati Deva and his chief commander Rudra Samani. The temple is obviously very unique in Indian history because it happens to be one of the only such temple monument which has been named after its architect, the man who made it, therefore the name Ramappa. Okay, very interesting to remember. Now this is just a visual imagery and you could just see the aesthetic significance of the temple, how beautifully and how detailed the decoration of the broad pillars have been done. Okay, now let's remember that this temple also has some very crucial unique styles that we should know. Say for example, the most unique thing about the temple is that its Vimmana. Its Vimmana has been constructed with porous bricks. Now what are porous? Porous are materials which are slightly more open to absorbing things. Their structure is they are loosely moleculed, which means they can absorb things very fast, just like your marble. Marble could be very porous sometimes. You could actually seep something through it. So this is the beauty about this, that the bricks of the Vimmana are very porous in nature and they are in the shape of a pyramid. So right here is the image in front of you, the first image to the left. That's what I'm talking about when we discuss the Dravidian style of temple architecture. You can see the massive step by step kind of gopurams and the Vimmanas that the temples create. Okay, on top of each other. Having said this, another very few distinctive architectural features of the temple is earthquake resistant design. Now that is quite amazing because people say that when the temple was created, there was a massive use of acacia wood. Apart from acacia wood, you could also say it acacia wood, there was also a massive use of a fruit which is almost like your gooseberry, amla. At the same time, they also used a lot of wood shaft, light cravings from wood, shavings from wood. All these were blended together and they made a material which had the capacity to literally be so light that it could float in water. So therefore, in the case of an earthquake or a tremor, the temple wouldn't come down, it wouldn't break down, it could resist the shocks. So that's very unique, please remember. Second thing is that the sandstone technique, which is also the sandbox technique that was used. So what is the sandbox technique? The foundation of the temple, you could say the base of the temple, was employing a technique where materials like sand and lime, jaggery, black microbillion fruit, as I said, it quite like your fruit called gooseberry, amla, this was created to make a mix, which means it is so light now that nothing can break it down. A very modernistic, futuristic architecture design. So that's why we call it earthquake resistant. And this itself, the technique of mixing such materials to make something so light, is now being referred to as the sandbox technique. As light as sandstone, sandbox technique. Now similarly, we have another very unique speciality here, that's the musical pillar. Now this is really a very important thing to remember, that the temple has very deeply, beautifully decorated pillars. I just showed you an image as well. And these produce musical notes when they are touched. So that's a very important thing to remember. Something similar is also claimed about some other temples in Karnataka, like the Virupaksha temple as well. But let's remember that apart from that, there are many other temples in India which are lesser known, but who people say were also using some similar techniques. So this is an important thing to remember. Now one particular pillar is existing in this temple, which shows a beautiful ornate carving of Lord Krishna. Similarly, in 2021, because of these unique features, the Ramapa Temple was officially designated by UNESCO and it was recognized as the Kakatiya Rudreshwara or the Ramapa Temple, Telangana. So do remember these few facts, quite important there. And the next topic that we shall talk about is in association with Madhya Pradesh, and whenever Madhya Pradesh name comes up, we know that we could be referring to the Mahakal Temple at Ujjain, a very, very revered Hindu temple. And the context is that there was a very massive rainfall that happened, which led to a breakdown of one of the boundary walls near the temple, okay, near the Mahakaleshwar temple. Now, whenever we talk about the Mahakaleshwar temple, of course, we know that it is dedicated to Lord Shiva. Another thing, we know that it's one of the best known Jyotirlings in India. So a little bit on that more, that it is dedicated to Lord Shiva, and please do remember that it is situated on the banks of river Shipra. Now deliberately sometimes questions could confuse you. They could give you many other confusing questions like say giving you the name of Narmada river or the Tapi river, which also travels a very geographically similar territory. So this could add to confusion. So do remember that we are talking about the Shipra river. So also for your exams, therefore, because this was a news piece, remember some details about the Shipra river. Please revise the tributaries, distributaries, the point of origin of the river. This river becomes therefore very important here. Okay, situated in the banks of the Shipra river, this is one of the 12 Jyotirlings in India. Yes, let's remember that here when we talk about the Jyotirling, now every Jyotirling in India, we have total 12. So they are all unique because they showcase a very different manifestation of Lord Shiva's image. Similarly, let's remember that although people do not have an exact clarity about when did the Mahakaleshwar temple actually emerge, when was it created, but broadly it could be associated with the 6th century BC. A very good thing to remember is that today as the temple stands as a major depiction of India's temple architecture, it was rebuilt back in the 18th century AD once again just to rejuvenate the collapsing architecture. Now this is also recognized as one of the 7 Mukti Sthals or the sacred sites of liberation. For example, another one could be Varanasi, where people feel that if they lose their lives in such places, then they actually might go to the heavenly abode directly. So that's the sheer cultural significance of this region. Now talking more about the architectural style of this revered temple, we talk about a massive courtyard, a massive backyard which is adorned with various kinds of sculptures all coming from the different dynasties such as Chalukya, Maratha, Bhumija architectural style. We recently discussed Bhumija, so I'm asking you a question again. To which broad style does Bhumija sub-style associate with? It's a very important thing to remember. Similarly, the platform of the temple is made up of stone. Another thing to remember could be that it has a very impressive lingam scriptures of Mahakaleshwar along with other deities like Lord Ganesh, Goddess Parvati and Kakatiya, and this is situated in the Garbhagriha in different directions, north, west and east. Now please remember, Garbhagriha is the sanctum sanctorum where the main idol of the Lord, the deity, is placed, to whom the temple is dedicated. Always remember. Okay, and this is quite common to various architectural styles in India, quite common to each of them. Every temple will have a Garbhagriha. Okay. Similarly, additionally, the temple includes a tank. I was telling you that certain temples in India inspired by the Visara and Dravida style, they started using a tank or a water body in the premises of the temple. Here as well you see a tank constructed in the Sarvatobhrada style. Okay. Now having said this, another topic that we are going to now talk about discusses about the Sachi Stoop, the Great Stoop, which is also a depiction of famous Indian temple architecture, albeit why was it in news? Because the External Affairs Minister had visited the replica of the east gate of the Great Stoop at Sachi, and then it was displayed in front of a very famous called the Humboldt Forum Museum in Berlin in Germany. So talking about the Sachi Stoop, of course we are taken to Buddhism. We know that specifically in the central and in the western parts of India, there is a massive heritage of Buddhist architecture. Now whether you talk about the Ajanta Ellora caves or whether you talk about your Khajuraho temples, many temples in India have borrowed themes from Jataka stories. Jataka stories often talk about the various lives and various experiences of Lord Buddha in different incarnations. Okay, so talking about this, now we are talking about the Sachi Stoop, and this is associated with one of the oldest stone structures created during the 3rd century BC, and of course it was done under the famous Buddhist king of India, Ashoka. Okay. Also remember that here it is geographically placed in Madhya Pradesh in the Vidisha region, and again it's a very unique architecture style, because we talk about various kind of stupas associated here, various kind of thin towering like structures. It also borrows a massive monastery like structure, typically extension of a monastery architectural style. So it was initially constructed during Ashoka's rule, but later it was also further developed and propagated at the Shunga dynasty in the 2nd century BC. Okay, now definitely another important thing would be that in 1989 it was recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Very important to remember. You could see the massive image here of the entire stoop. So please notice how the most iconic feature of this great stupa are elaborate, beautifully ornated gateways. Now these gateways are referred to as the Torans. See, I'm encircling one here. These are the Torans, the impressive gateways inside the stoop. And they are pointed at various directions, the north, south, east, west. You could see all 4. This is the most remarkable architectural style here. So please remember, these are known as the Torans, okay, associated with the Sachi Stoop, the great Buddhist stoop at Sachi. Now these Torans are decorated with, as I said, various stories from Lord Buddha's life. Okay, also they are referred to as Jataka tales sometimes, and therefore they also have various depictions of symbols associated with Lord Buddha, such as the Bodhi tree, the lotus, the law of life cycle, the wheel of dharma. All these things are depicted here beautifully. And another very important thing to remember here is the horizontal beam, that is almost like a horizontal structure that is resting on the gateway. Okay, and this actually also has a very deep philosophical meaning in Buddhism. So there are 3 parts to it. The upper part actually shows the previous incarnations of Lord Buddha. It is known as the 7 Manushi Buddhas. The middle part of this entire slab, I'll show you the image as well once again. It shows the great departure as Lord Buddha, earlier known as Siddhartha. He left for Kapilavastu to leave behind a materialistic life and become an ascetic. The lower part actually shows how Emperor Ashok had visited the Bodhi tree where Lord Buddha had achieved his nirvana or the enlightenment, salvation. So these were the flat resting plinths that we were talking about here in the temple. Okay, these, the upper part of the Toranas, these 3 structures that we are talking about. Okay, so remember that each of these has a very deep cultural significance. And now let's also quickly talk about the Udagiri Caves in Bhubaneswar. They were all over the news across 2024. Why? Because Indian president had recently given a visit. So since then they have been massively in the news, and they are situated in the Kumari mountain range. Okay, and they represent one of the earliest forms of rock cut cave architecture in Odisha specifically. So historically these were created by King Kharvela. Now there's another very important Indian architecture that can be associated with King Kharvela. Could you tell me the name? If yes, then please post it on the comment and I'll be thrilled to know that you are aware of this. Another very important temple, another very important religious site created under the Kharvela kings. Please let me know. Okay. Now having said this, it was created by the Kharvela king from the Meghavana dynasty. And he dedicated this to Jain monks because the Kharvela dynasty was associated with a belief in Jainism. Similarly, the significance is that the most important thing to remember is the Hathi Gumpa inscription. It often comes in the questions. The Hathi Gumpa inscriptions, which have been written in the Brahmi script, associated with King Kharvela's various conquests, wars, campaigns, is also housed right here in the Udayagiri. Okay, do remember this. And also let's remember that within these caves there is a very famous cave known as the Varaha cave, cave 5. So Varaha being one of the reincarnations of Lord Vishnu himself, the cave is predominantly very famous because it shows how earth goddess is completely in chaos, and therefore it is surrounded by gods and saints who protect it. So it shows the boar incarnation of Lord Vishnu. That's why it's known as the Varaha. So please remember. Similarly, when you talk about the Ellora Ajanta cave, some caves specifically become very important there. So do remember these specific ones also. out of the entire broad structure. Okay, now talking about the Sangameshwara Temple, that was also massively in the news because it was inundated because of a flooding that happened in the Krishna River. So it is situated in the Nandyal district and it was submerged because of the backwater flooding. Okay, and due to the ongoing Sri Sailam project. So due to this, it became a very predominant news piece. And let's remember that the temple is dedicated once again to Lord Shiva and situated in the Nandyal districts of Andhra Pradesh. The most important thing to remember here would be the flooding, and it happened because of the river Krishna water completely flowing out because of the ongoing construction of the Sri Sailam Dam. These are three things you must remember. Now talking about, because the temple was in the news, who made it? Again, one of the most famous kings from the Chalukya dynasty, Pulakesin II. Pulakesin II was the one who made it in 740 AD, and it's very strategically located, in fact, between the confluence of the rivers Krishna and one of the tributaries Tungabhadra. About 10 kilometers they are situated from the current site of the temple. Now also let's remember that the temple was therefore very, very carefully dismantled. It was taken apart and then once again reassembled rock by rock to achieve its original position. So that's why it becomes very, very critical to remember and to preserve heritage sites. Now this could also take you back to the Hriday project of the Indian government that was initiated back in 2015. Under Hriday, the government had made sure that all architectural, touristic sites of cultural significance would be given massive attention and they would be rejuvenated. So this reminds me of the Hriday scheme. So also remember the Hriday scheme, because whenever we talk about preserving a temple or an architecture, the Hriday scheme automatically comes in picture. Now the next issue under scanner is the Shri Jaganath Temple in Puri, just a day before the one-day match against England. So the Indian cricket team had actually paid a visit to the temple, which means it was predominant in the news. So we must also do some coverage about the Jaganath Temple. And let's remember that situated in Puri, it needs no introduction. In Odisha, dedicated to Lord Jaganath, a reincarnation of Lord Vishnu. Okay, let's remember it was created in the 12th century AD by King Anantavarman Chodaganga's Deva's reign. It was created by then during 1230 AD under Anang Bhima Dev III. So both the names become quite important here. Also let's remember that this is housing the deity Lord Jagannath, Balabhadra and Subhadra in the Garbhagriha, the Sanctum Sanctorum, the main place where the deity, the idols are placed. So these are the three idols that we witness in this temple, quite important. It is celebrated because every year you have the annual Rath Yatra here, which is drawing thousands of tourists and pilgrims across the world. So very important to remember. Recently again it was in the news as one massive bird had actually come and settled on the top of the temple. So people were associating with lots of mythological stories and the present day climate change and any harm that should not happen to the existing architecture. So all these things were also being spoken about. So quite important there. Now, more about Jagannath Temple really. So let's remember it is already a UNESCO World Heritage Site from India. Very important to remember. It is also recognized as one of the key pillars of India's Char Dham Yatra. Of course, it exemplifies the Kalinga architecture style. The Kalinga architecture style associated with the regions of Odisha and some parts of southern Bihar. Do remember the Kalinga architecture style. Why is it so unique? Because it is also created on a raised central temple design in which there is no shadow of the temple that falls on the ground. So that's the most important unique thing to remember here, that in the Kalinga style, the shadow of the temple shouldn't really be manifested on the ground. So do remember. And this also reminds me that I would want you to answer one question from me, that which in India is known as the Black Pagoda of India and which is known as the White Pagoda in general. So these are two questions. I wish you could answer me and I will be very happy to see you answering these questions. Okay, now another very interesting topic would be the Virupaksha Temple at Hampi in Karnataka, a very famous World Heritage Site again, and it was in the news because the government has been making massive conservation efforts. In this regard, also it experienced a lot of destruction due to extreme heavy rainfalls that happened in 2024, and near the temple pavilion there was some damage that happened to the architecture, and hence the restoration efforts made big news. Talking about the Virupaksha Temple, here's a beautiful image that displays the rich ancient Indian architecture associated with this site, and it has been listed as the UNESCO World Heritage Group of Monuments at Hampi since 1986. Having said that, it is dedicated to Lord Viru, another form of Lord Shiva himself. Now, this actually had emerged as a very humble shrine, a very moderate shrine, and eventually it was expanded during the Vijayanagar era. It was during the times of the Vijayanagar kingdom that it was further expanded, and later there were contributions made to it by the Chalukyan and the Hoysala dynasties. So overall, the modern shape is an amalgamation of contributions from various dynasties, as we see here. Talking about that, a little bit more about the Virupaksha temple, it is one of the epitomes of the Dravidian architectural style, and the most interesting thing, as I had mentioned about the Dravidian architecture, is the massive use of pillars, broad pillars, very highly decorated, carved, ornated pillars, typically situated in every direction. So something similar is being spoken about here, that even in the divine Virupaksha temple, you see intricate, very detailed craftsmanship. There is a sanctum sanctorum like in every temple, the Garbhagriha, and then of course there is a multi-pillared chamber. Many pillars. There is a 100-pillared hall. That's a distinctive thing to remember. And many antechambers. So in these chambers, small halls, there are about 100-pillar halls. That's important. And similarly, it also showcases the sophistication of engineering that was created at that time, mathematical genius, because it showcases the rectilinear light theory. Now, what could this be? Rectilinear light theory, as in there is a massive use in a very physical use of construction design in such a way that there is a pinhole camera effect being created. There are measured reflections and refractions of light happening in and outside the Garbhagriha. There are fractals, geometrical design patterns, and Fibonacci sequence, which means the design is in such a way that the lights are getting refracted, reflected in exactly the same pattern day after day. And that's, I think, something that's literally mind-blowing. Even we were talking about the Ram Mandir at Ayodhya. There also the design was made in such a way that the first sunlights would actually fall on the revered idol itself. So it was almost like creating a tilak to the god, almost like, showing some kind of a reverence to the god directly from the sunlight itself. So that was a architectural marvel. So similarly here as well, back then, the complicated design actually shows the use of extreme sophisticated physics phenomena to create a perfectly balanced light effect. Now, talking about inverted pinhole image, there is also this design being used in one of its towers, which are visible on the inner wall. So, which also shows that during ancient India, architecture was not just about reverence, it was not just about using existing materials. But despite lack of sophisticated transportation, it's amazing to see the kind of physical properties, the kind of science sophistication concepts being used in these engineering fields. So that's why these temples become so important even as heritage sites. So talking about the Virupaksha temple, do remember the 100-pillar hall. Please remember the extensive use of the sophisticated architectural technology here. Now talking about the Kamakya Devi temple in Assam, very often in the news we've heard about how we celebrate the Ambubachi festival every now and then. It's in the news for its unique showcase of various religious practices. But similarly, centered in Assam, the Kamakya temple is one of the most important Shakti Peeths in India, where we believe that goddess herself has some power that is encapsulated in these regions. So it is associated with extreme divinity of goddess, very powerful. These are power centers in Indian Hindu worship system. Also, let's remember that this is also a center of tantric practices now. If we talk about the 7th 8th century developments in Buddhism in specific, you might remember that your NCERT's book from history talk about how the later Buddhism also took up to certain forms of Vajrayana form of worships, which means that specifically in the east and in the northeast India, there were certain neo-Buddhist practices which mixed up with the Hindu practices, and together they created a kind of new blend of following which was very tantric in nature. It was extremely about very abstract forms of worship associated with huge power and mysticism. So that is what we are referring to in Kamakya temple. Now it is situated in the Nilanchal hill, which is very close to the southern bank of Brahmaputra river in Guwahati, Assam. It's one of the most important of the 51 Shakti Peeths in India, the most powerful worshipping centers in India. And the temple architecture again is of course unique because it shows a blend of the Nagara style and of the Mughal style, also refers to as the Saracenic style. So this is slightly unique because so far we've seen everything that is an amalgamation of the Dravida and the Nagara. But today when we talk about the Kamakvi Devi temple, we are seeing a mix of the Nagara and the Saracenic or the Mughal style. So this blend is known as the Nilansha style. Okay, the Nilachala style you must remember, therefore quite important for the exam. Also remember, this is the only temple in Assam which has a fully developed ground plan. It's a proper detailed architectural ground plan which consists of 5 different segments. One of course is the Garbhagriha, the Sanctum Sanctorum. Then of course you have the Antarala, which is the vestibule of the temple. Then we talk about the principal, the main chamber. We talk about the Bhog Mandir, where rituals take place. And then the Nath Mandir, the opera hall, the massive hall for religious proceedings. Now this also is very famous for the Ambubachi celebration or the Ambubachi Mela, which celebrates the menstrual cycle and which celebrates the menstrual mysticism associated with goddess Kamakhya. So once again, it's a very, you could say, a new dimension of worship in Hinduism, because most often whenever we talk about how temples are associated with mysticism and religion, so we always talk about controversies like the one that happened in the case of not allowing menstrual women to enter the temple as such in Kerala. So the Sabalimala temple controversy we all know about. So similarly, this is another very different dimension, that not only is it something that people revere, but also it just showcases the femininity and the mysticism associated with Hindu worship forms, particularly the tantric forms of worship. So that's why quite important to remember. Now the next topic or the subtopic that we are referring to is from Bihar, and we are talking about the Quesary Stoop, a massive construction associated with Buddhist style, and the government is trying to develop it as a major tourist attraction site. So this is one of the largest, actually the largest Buddhist stoop in the world, situated in the place called Quesary Bihar, quite near the capital city of Patna. Let's remember that it was initially built in the 3rd century BC by the architects under Emperor Ashok, and then much later we also see one of the relics in Ashoka's pillar capital, which talks about this massive stoop. Now the current structure actually can once again be associated with the Gupta period, and we could specifically link it to Raja Chakravarti. So all these names become important here. Now talking about the stoop itself, as I said, the largest Buddhist stoop across the world, and it shows various descriptions and various inscriptions from Buddha's lifetime, particularly the Lichavi descriptions. Now we all know that maternally Lord Buddha was associated with the Lichavi clan, given that his mother hailed from that community. So having said that, there are massive Lichavi descriptions here regarding Buddha's life. Historically, it was ruled by Mauryas, the Lichavi clan, and it shows that how significant it is in the terms of cultural practices of both the dynasties. It was also visited by Yuan-sang and Fahin in history, again quite important therefore. And during Emperor Kanishka, the Kushan dynasty, the very famous ruler, again many gold coins. Now we know that the Kushan period is associated with very pure use of gold coins, unadulterated. The purity is absolutely next only to the Indo-Greek coins. I think people say that after the Indo-Greek usage of gold coins, it was only under Kanishka that we see the purest form of gold coins being used in India. So some of them were also discovered at this site. So it suggests a connection with the Kushan dynasty too. And now it was initially explored, found by Colonel Mackenzie, who's also associated with the discussion and the discovery of certain sites in Deccan India associated with the Vijayanagar kingdom. So the same person here, Colonel Mackenzie, back in 1814, and much later General Cunningham, associated with the Archaeological Survey of India, also excavated some discoveries in 1998. And now talking about various paintings in India. Now as I said, India is polycultural. Even when it comes to textile and painting, we see so much heterogeneity across India among various styles. So one of the most important thing to remember is that in news of late, in the last few months, we had this 4 or 5 painting styles. So let's quickly see them. First is the Sohrai painting. Talking about the Sohrai painting, it was recently given the GI identification tag. Now geographical indication tag means the purity and the authentic origin of a place or an art or a culture. It's a heritage of that place. So the GI tag was given to Hazaribagh, Jharkhand based painting style called the Sohrai. Okay, typically it's a very utilitarian art because it's used to ornate mud houses by the villagers and the tribals using basic things like rice pigment or basic materials, raw materials from nature, like your own manual drawings and wood pieces and all of that. And they typically depict nature like birds, animals, a very simple rural lifestyle. The next is Matani Pechidi. Now this is associated with Gujarat actually, and let's remember that it is inspired by kalamkari. Now kalamkari, when we often talk about, we know the word has been taken from doing something with your pen. Beautiful textile in India, very often associated with Andhra Pradesh region also. So this Matadi Pechidi style is associated with inspiration from kalamkari, and let's remember it is associated with the Vaghari community. This is something we must remember, the Vaghari community. Okay, now this is typically a very religious form of folk art. So therefore we often talk about depicting devotees, flowers, various animals, and again it's done in a very simple way. The colors are black, maroon, white. Sometimes they use bamboo stick pens, bamboo sticks as pens to make it by hand. All the drawings are done by hand. Again, very, very unique. Now next is the Kumithi Pathai rock art. As the name suggests, it is typically done as rock inscriptions, rock paintings, and generally inside the cave, associated with a history of say 3000 years before and found in the regions of Tamil Nadu. It is again done with a white paint and some adhesive material on the rock itself. Okay, so generally depicts very rural, primitive, pre-agrarian paintings like early men and their chariots and their agriculture farms and things like those. Very, very pristine lifestyle. The next we're talking about is the Kerala mural paintings. They were in the news and they are associated with the Bhakti movement and associated with the 14th century AD. Typically it talks about various stories from Hindu mythology. Scenes have been borrowed from Hindu epics like the Chitrakandas. So quite important in the news, and let's remember that which area do each come from. That's quite important, not the date specifically. Now the next we are talking about tribes. We know that India houses say about more than 8% of tribal population as per the census 2011. Let's also remember that India has heterogeneity in tribal culture. Across various states, outside the northeastern states, we see massive tribal communities in Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Gujarat. And talking about these tribes, tribes are known for their unique celebrations, unique festivals. One such is the Hornbill Festival. The Hornbill Festival associated with the state of Nagaland. Now Hornbill is a bird. These tribes are also associated with conservation and preservation efforts for these birds. So in that light, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs has created a token grant, some financial grant to support these tribals from Nagaland as they celebrate the 25th edition of their Hornbill Festival. This festival is also referred to as the Festival of Festivals. It's that important in Nagaland. Okay, usually it's held in the winter months from December first week to the 10th of December. Nagaland sometimes is also known as the land of capitals because of the sheer diversity and various festival celebration here. This legacy of Hornbill Festival is dated to 2000. And let's remember that it is celebrating not only the rich culture of Nagaland, but also it shows how beautifully these tribals have put in energies and used cultural values to protect birds and animals. The ecological restoration efforts that this entire celebration points out to is very, very crucial here. It could also be inspirational actually to many other communities in India to go for something similar, because ultimately the intention is ecological conservation. So here we see about 17 local tribes who celebrate the festival together, and the bird itself, which is a very symbolic theme in this festival, the hornbill bird. The tribals often wear the disguise of that bird, and there is a dance associated with that, various ceremonies associated with that. The bird itself is worshipped, it's revered in Nagaland. It is revered for its beauty, grace, the aesthetic appeal, and of course it is also seen as a symbol of loyalty and compassion. So that's the whole beautiful folktale behind the festival. To remember the state and the festival. And now the next is Indian languages. Now we all know that in India we almost recognize about 22 official languages. Now we also know that, okay, let me ask a question. Now which schedule of the Indian Constitution talks about official languages? Okay, so do let me know in the comments. It's a very easy question, of course, and I would love to hear your comments. So please comment, please let me know It will be good to know that which schedule really talks about languages. Now that we say that India has 22 official languages, and then apart from that we have many classical languages. Of course we have regional languages, folk languages and dialects. Okay, given this diversity, the Union Cabinet, chaired by the honored Indian Prime Minister, had recently approved certain languages like Marathi, Pali, Prakrit, Assami and Bengali, and started the discussion or spoke about giving these languages the status of a classical language. What is a classical language? So classical languages are differentiated from other languages because one, they have a written script, of course. They are not dialects, they are languages with scripts. Second thing is they are unique. They have not borrowed, they are not diluted. Their script is very original. And then it also should be very age old. It should date back to some point in Indian history. It should have a long enough heritage, and that's when it actually becomes a classical language. Now, India is therefore characterized by a history of many languages. We are a very multilingual heritage, and therefore we can say that classical languages, when we talk about presently, India celebrates 6 languages as classical languages. It was Tamil that was declared in 2004. We have Sanskrit in 2005, Kannada 2008, Telugu 2008 again, Malayalam 2013 and Odia 2014. Now 2014 is quite an important year for India. Not only was Odia made a classical language, there was one state also which became an independent state after being bifurcated from another state. We have spoken about that state at least 10 times in today's class. Which state is that? Come on. A quick answer there. I'll be waiting for your response in the comment box. So Odia got in 2014. Okay. Now today the government talks about giving these new languages the classical status too. So let's remember that once a language becomes a classical language, it is given that designation by the Ministry of Human Resource and Development. That language then attracts a lot of support from the government in terms of its promotion and its propagation. Say for example, there is a too significant annual international award system that is there. These awards are given to distinguished scholars, writers in these classical Indian languages. There is a center for excellence for classical languages which studies the development, evolution and establishment of these languages. We talk about the UGC, University Grants Commission, which is now been asked by the government to create a separate chair, a separate department with professors who try to now propagate and further create more pedagogy in classical languages in the central university. So we are trying to establish departments for these languages which are classical, further to propagate Indian language, linguistic culture and heritage. So that's quite important to remember. Now the next important news for today would be when we talk about the Buddhist Confederation. The Ministry of Culture had inaugurated the International Buddhist Confederation, and this happened as an initiative of First Asian Buddhist Summit. The ABS took place in New Delhi under the broad theme of role of Buddhist religion or the role of Buddha Dharma in strengthening Asia. Now we know that under Emperor Ashoka, Buddhism also spread its roots to other countries in the Southeast Asian region. So with that in mind, it's also a very beautiful initiative done by the southern eastern nations to come together, to experience a kind of religious cultural solidarity in the name of Buddhism and its followings. Also because it's a religion which associates with a lot of peace, tranquility and mutual support. So that's why it could mean better geopolitical ties, it could mean better diplomatic ties with all these countries in the Asian region, right? Having said that, quickly a little bit about what is so unique about the Buddhist culture and religion and tradition. So let's remember that entire religion is based on teachings from Lord Buddha. The underlying principles, of course, are non-violence, truth and peace. Having said that, there are other things that Buddhism teaches. Say for example, 4 noble truths of Buddhism. Say for example, there is always suffering in the world. And the main reason behind the suffering is the fact that people have desires, people are materialistic. And the only way the suffering can end, Nirodha, it can be only when you master your inner self, when you have a spiritual awakening of not always wanting material pleasures, but to actually find the real meaning of life. Similarly, Buddhism talks about the Noble Eightfold Path, which are the 8 ways in which you can achieve a tranquil state of mind and an inner realization. And these are about the Samadhi. For example, have the right view, have the right perspective in life. Similarly, the right intention, your heart should be pure. That talks about the Sama Sankappa. Of course, we have the Samavaka, which means always talk something that's ethical. Do not talk something that's incorrect or unethical, immoral. Then the right action is the most important, the Sama Kamanatha. Then we talk about the right livelihood, have a right means of livelihood. Things like stealing or something unethical way of earning money is not acceptable. That's Sama Ajivika. Ajivika, your lifestyle, your livelihood, your means of earning. Then we talk about the right effort, the Sama Vayama. We talk about right mindfulness. Practice mindfulness, be in the moment. Do not worry about the future or the past as much. Samasati. And eventually it's the right concentration, the Sama Samadhi, which means when you meditate, that's the whole beauty of achieving the inner peace and the calmness that people are looking for. So when we talk about how Buddhism actually diffused out of India and took roots in various other Eastern countries, specifically Southeast Asian countries, we see how in 6th century after Lord Buddha, Prince Siddhartha, he achieved salvation, which is known as the nirvana in Buddhism. So that shows how after that slowly the religion started picking up. Okay, this is also sometimes known as the Maha Kaivalya, when he achieved the enlightenment. So now we say that 268 232 BC Emperor Ashoka was also, after the Kalinga War of 261, how he completely lost interest and he was absolutely distressed by the devastation and the killings in the war, and he adopted the religion which was peaceful, that's Buddhism. Then his children also went to other countries, and they started spreading the religion towards these nations too. So that was in the 1st century BC, when a new tradition called the Mahayana and the Nikaya traditions started developing within Buddhism. Various texts also started coming. So we talk about the bigger wheel of Buddhism, the smaller wheel of Buddhism, the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Many other forms started developing. Then the 3rd century BC, how Ashoka's Dharmadut, Lord Ashok, the Emperor Ashok would actually appoint religious missionaries or religious officers who would go and spread people the value of truth, non-violence, peace, and eventually the beauty of Buddhist belief. So these people would be referred to as the Dharmaduta, the people who spread the dharma or the right path, religion. Also, he also had a Dharma Mahamantralaya, a ministry specifically devoted to spreading the message of Buddhism, peace, love, and ethics among people. So then eventually communities were established because of Ashokan efforts into Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and then back in the 1st century BC, it was through the Silk Route that Buddhism actually spread on from Central to Eastern Asia. Then we talk about the 11th century, where people like the Atisha Dipankara and Bodhidharma, all these contributed to further spreading Buddhism to the upper terrains of Tibet and more countries of East Asia. So today, as we see, whether we talk about Cambodia or Vietnam or Myanmar, or you talk about countries like Thailand, Indonesia, India, of course, we see there is a massive following. We see depictions, we see architectural designs. We also see how today countries who share the Buddhist philosophy are now coming together and therefore trying to create a whole new diplomacy, a whole new process of mutual cooperation with each other. So that is absolutely a very wonderful intervention in today's difficult geopolitical times. And when we talk about the Buddhist dharma, then of course there are certain symbols that become important. So for example, life is very, very transient, life is impermanent, that's known as anika. There is suffering in life, dukkha, and of course there is the non-self, the ananta. People need to understand that their own ego is nothing, but life is much beyond that. So we are nothing but a part of the entire cosmic domain. Then there are 3 jewels of Buddhism: the enlightened one, the teaching of the enlightened one, and the community who follow that person, who practice these principles. Of course, Buddhism is rooted in this backbone of non-violence, truthfulness, and kindness, compassion towards others. So these teachings also guide people towards enlightenment, kaivalya, and liberation from the cycle of constant rebirth, suffering. So ultimately it's about mastering your own duties, your own actions, your karma. So that's what Buddhism typically talks about. So today the Delhi Declaration was adopted in this summit, and the Delhi Declaration is important because it once again highlights the importance of preserving and restoring Pali texts, finding more of them, researching more into them, prioritizing its conservation efforts. Similarly, it strengthens ties among the Asian countries based on the principles of Buddhism. Then we talk about better youth participation could lead to a better value driven and a more moralistic society. Of course, we see how Buddhist teachings today could mean volumes to the kind of world order characterized by war, strifes, and civil strifes among people. So, this could also be a very important message to the global community. So, talking about Indian diplomacy, India has always focused on the neighbor first or look east policy since forever it has been that way. So, despite the Indian China skirmish, it's like for India, it becomes therefore very important to have a kind of solid bond with all the countries of the East Asian region. Also, because of the massive Chinese aggression and the force of China that's always prevailing, that's always persisting in this region. So, historically, also, say, Asia is home to 97% of the global Buddhist population. So shows the solidarity and the similarity among these nations in terms of their religious inclinations. Then we talk about religious sites. Now India also promotes many other international Buddhist sites such as Bodh Gaya, Sarnath, the Nalanda University. Then recently even the Prime Minister has spoken about creating and completely restructuring the Nalanda University and once again beginning proper academic courses there to promote more Pali studies. That's a very important intervention. Then we have collaborations with countries like Nepal, also to enhance cross-cultural Buddhist connections. Diplomacy-wise also this plays a very important role because it could mean India strengthening its ties with the ASEAN countries. So this again is very important, and as I said, it's also like a counterbalancing against China's aggression in the South China. So all the countries of the ASEAN coming together would mean volumes for mutual support to each other. So having said this, we now talk about the megalith. Now right since we study the prehistory period of India, whether we talk about the Neolithic, Mesolithic or a Paleolithic, we know that clearly a period comes in the ancient Indian history that's even much before we talk about Indian culture taking concrete shape, that we see megalith form of architecture. Now why is it suddenly significant is because a very massive important archaeological finding has happened in Kerala, a place called Kanhirapoil, and this revealed 24 sets of prehistoric megalithic footprints. And of course there was also a carving of human figure on a piece of land. So what are megaliths? Now megaliths means mega, they are, and lith means stone. So these are massive monuments made up of large bricks of stones, large chunks of stone, and they are associated with prehistoric times and typically with burial. We could see a lot of burial sites where the dead people were buried inside the ground. There megaliths were created. So this was a symbolic of memorials to the dead people. Okay, and burial megaliths were the people, the architectures which contained the burial site of a particular person who's been buried there. Of course, it was also covered with a mushroom-like structure known as the capstone. Then it had a dolmenoid cyst-like structure. These are the stone-created chambers or small box-like structures here. But then there are also some megalith sites which are not associated with burial custom. These are the non-burial megaliths. These are more memorial in nature. These are about tall stones, long, massive blocks of stone that were created during the prehistoric period just to commemorate somebody's name or in somebody's memory, say for example. So hence just remember that these are large stone structures typically associated with burial customs in prehistory, but some of them are also non-burial sites. Having said that, typically the megalithic culture is associated with chronologically the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century BCE, and they were generally related to the findings from Brahmagiri excavations. Let's remember that geographically these were situated in the Deccan India. Say in the banks of Godavari river, we talk about Punjab plains, the northern central Indian part called the Indo-Gangetic plains. We talk about Rajasthan, Gujarat and Jammu Kashmir. Now also these areas are associated with the T-shaped, H symmetry culture. These are associated with culture where we used to find humans along with their pet dogs also buried. We found certain copper utensils being buried in the later sites, of course, as copper started becoming predominant. We could see some jewelry or some beads being buried there. So this also holds significance to actually understand better the prehistoric period. Now notable sites are then Bihar, Saraikala, we have Khera in Uttar Pradesh and Diosa in Rajasthan. So remember what these sites relate to. All these are megalithic sites, and just have a quick understanding of the states these are associated with really. Okay, now some of the important features of the megalithic style of architecture were Iron usage, yes, they were absolutely using a lot of iron tools, and this is visible in, say, the Junapani site of Vidarbha as well as Tamil Nadu. Similarly, rock paintings are associated, people dancing, hunting, cooking, all these are also depicted in megalithic sites. Then it also shows advanced form of metallurgy. People knew how to work with metals, how to do welding and binding the metals together, creating simple rudimentary arts from those. And all these also show, they depict the very rural agrarian side of art and architecture associated with these prehistoric people. And the next topic that we are going to talk about is the National Mission for Manuscript. Well, quite important again, because the Ministry of Culture is talking about reviving, re-enhancing, relaunching the National Mission for Manuscript to preserve Indian ancient texts and ancient Indian artifacts. So this actually is being considered to be established as an independent autonomous body. Let's remember that. So the National Mission for Manuscript was actually initially established in 2003 by the Ministry of Culture. Today the government is talking about reviving it, enhancing its role, and it ultimately aims to document, preserve, restore and spread, create more awareness about India's manuscriptures. Now, typically whenever we use the word manuscript, it's almost like something that somebody has written from hand. It is not a printed script, it is a hand-written, hand-created document. So that's the beauty of it. It talks volumes about the prevalent form of literature, literacy, awareness, lifestyle of a particular period of history. Similarly, this mission therefore aims at not only finding new manuscripts but also preserving or restoring and conserving the existing ones. Now, the objectives of the mission are very clear. Do a national survey to find out various manuscripts, train scholars to understand and read these manuscripts, preserve them using modern techniques. Of course, create an electronic database so that none of them are lost in future. We can always have a permanent recording. Then we can digitize the ones that are very rare, yet very important. And then we talk about creating catalogs to it, having a proper browsing method so that people can enjoy Indian heritage, people can access it, people can contribute to it if they wish to, and establish, say, about 100 manuscript resource and conservation centers. So all these are very ambitious plans made by the government. And now we talk about how the government of India and United States of America have signed a pact, which is the Cultural Property Agreement, a very important milestone in art and architecture realm. It's the 46th World Heritage Committee meeting in which this pact was signed, and the governments have agreed to exchange and to trade back all the critical artifacts, all the critical antique items that were illegally taken away from one country into another country. So smuggling had been done. So now the government is doing a restorative effort by returning the original handicrafts and returning the original antiquities from the country to which they hail from. And that's a very welcome note, because again it shows the commitment of the governments to preserve art and architecture and culture, of course. So to stop and to completely combat the practice of illegal trafficking of antiques outside India to US, that's one important thing. To commercialize a culture illegally, that's something that government is planning to stop. Then it goes with Article 9 of the 1970 UNESCO Convention, which says that there is a complete prohibition on illegal, illicit import, export, transfer of cultural property between the countries of India and US without permission from the government. It should not be allowed. Similarly, talking more about the Cultural Property Agreement, as we just saw, it says that civil, religious, royal architecture materials, be it anything, be it something related to religion, ceremony, tradition, these manuscripts, which range from 2nd century up till 1947, should not be illicitly exchanged. They should not be taken out of the country. They cannot be smuggled out. Similarly, under the agreement, US is committed to returning India all those materials that were illegally imported to US. So the government will forfeit that and return it back to India. Similarly, US has established similar agreements with many other countries, not just India, of course. So these would be Algeria, a lot of African countries. Now you might also be very fascinated to see that most of these countries with which US has established this agreement are the ones who were reeling under colonialism, because it was during colonialism that majority of antiquities, wealth, coinage, and manuscripts were actually secretly stolen from the colonies and transported into the imperial nations. From there, they were sold in the world market. It became very commercialized. So, today, in order to restore back the respect, the dignity, and the art and the culture of the earlier colonial sites, the government of the US is committed to some such initiative, which is also a very welcome initiative, of course, of returning cultural significant things to a country. So these are many countries that come in picture. Some are from South America. We talk about Ecuador, we talk about El Salvador. Of course, you have European countries like Greece, we have Turkey, we have Italy, and then you have Jordan, and we talk about African countries like, say, Belize, we talk about Algeria, then South America, Chile, we talk about China, Peru, Turkey. All these countries are the ones with which US is striking this deal. So talking about the efforts to preserve these antiquities and symbols of architecture and heritage globally, it is the Kashi Cultural Pathway, which is the outcome document from the G20 Culture Working Group that wanted to create a joint coalition between countries to enable such an initiative. Similarly, at a very national level, at India's domestic level, we talk about how Antiquities and Art Treasure Act 1972, Section 3 of this act talks about completely prohibiting any export of such an antiquity from India, outside India. Then there is a role of Archaeological Survey of India, which says that it will be responsible for coordinating with foreign countries and associated departments to facilitate recovering India's antiquities from other countries. And since 1976, the ASI has successfully procured back 357 antiquities from various foreign countries. Okay, so next we talk about the handloom sector, a very important yet informal employment generator in India, a very important sector which also showcases the beauty of India's variety, myriad art, architecture and culture traditions. So the handloom industry in India has had a very long term tradition, and it also represents the wide diversity in Indian culture. The only problem being that it's still majority lies in the informal sector. Okay, so having said that, it also is a major employment giver, because we have about 2.8 million handlooms in India, and typically when we talk about a very poor female labor force participation in India, so this also talks volumes about why women are the victims of vulnerable unemployment, because a majority of them are actually employed in this industry, which is an informal industry, of course, but it gives employment to many women. So we see about 35.22 handloom workers employed across entire country, of which near about 25 lakh are women. 72.29% are women. Export wise, there are extensive textile, cotton based and artisan based products that are exported from India into world markets, and the key importing countries from India would be, to which India exports its handlooms, are US, UAE, Spain, Italy, Australia, France, Germany, say Netherlands, Greece. So the world market spreads across US, Europe primarily, of course Middle East also, Central Asia also. Then we talk about key export centers in India. So these are Karur, Panipat, we talk about Varanasi, Kannur. All these are centers which have an extensive heritage of handlooms. So here's this map which generally shows you the rich tradition of handloom culture in India, and of course it's been made very beautifully in a very culturally regionally relevant way. Let's say, for example, we talk about Gujarat, we say Bandhani, we talk about Rajasthan, we say Ajrak, we talk about Kalamkari prints, we talk about various kinds of brocade work that happens in Uttar Pradesh. So the map is a very beautiful picture of that. Now, the government has taken tremendous initiatives also to therefore promote the handloom sector. For example, National Handloom Development Program of 21-22 to 25-26 talks about a need-based approach, integrating handlooms with industrial inputs so that better market access is possible. Holistic development of the weavers community. We talk about market access initiative, where the government is trying that there are certain standard practices under which the handloom makers do not suffer any loss, and they have a good access to various market channels, online and offline, where they can conduct business, sell their products in a very monetary beneficial manner. Of course, the government will also make sure to support the smaller and individual handloom workers too, and micro industries also. It's again a very major segment of the MSME sector, let's remember. Now, the handloom mark. This is a certification scheme where the government is planning to provide authenticity and a kind of a copyright, a kind of an identification mark to handlooms produced from various regions, pretty much in line with the GI tag index, so that there is authenticity also, and the price tags also are very uniform across the sector. And having said that, you have the IPR, the intellectual property, the right protection, that intellectual property right protection that will be given to these handloom workers across the handloom products. These IPR will make sure that there is a clear cut geographical indication of goods under the 1999 Act and the Designs Act 2000. No plagiarism, no copying, and no smuggling. And then we talk about a raw material supply scheme where subsidized raw materials is being planned by the government to be provided to these handloom makers. We have the Handloom Export Promotion Council, which keeps on undertaking market research. It has various exhibitions across India and abroad. It conducts various trading missions, trading consortiums where Indian handloomers go showcase their products. They learn better practices, and this kind of exchange also takes place in an international matter. So now we could talk about another very important tribal festivals, just like we spoke about the handloom festival. This is the Samakka Saraka Medaram Jatara. So we are talking about how Prime Minister has extended his warm greetings to this celebration, and this festival is associated with a small village called Mulugu in the Telangana state of India, and it is celebrated specifically in the Etu Ragam Wildlife Sanctuary. So just the name itself is very important. The Etturagaram Wildlife Sanctuary. Here is the hotspot where the festival is generally celebrated. It's a tribal festival which celebrates the bravery and the commitment of goddess Samaka and Saralamma. And this is typically done by the Koya tribe who worship these deities. Now talking about Indian dances. Now we know that India has classical dances too, whether it's your Mohiniyattam, or whether it's your Kathakali from Kerala, whether it's Kathak from UP, whether it's Kuchipudi from Andhra, or whether it's your Odishi from Odisha, and so on. Similarly, we have Kuchipudi, one of the 8 classical dances of India associated with Andhra Pradesh, the village of Kuchipudi from where it gets its name. So traditionally it evolved, it dates back to the copper inscriptions of the Machupalli Kaifat, that is say 17th century in India, and it was basically the brainchild of a Vaishnava poet, Siddharendra Yogi. Okay, so it was initiated by him, and the dance emerged as a very popular form and also as a theatrical performance. So here essentially the males would cross dress in a very elaborate, ornate way, and then narrate stories from the Bhagavad Purana in a very musical, in a very hand action and entire bodily expressive way. So that's the beauty about this art. The dress is very elaborate, as you can see in the picture. So again, a very important symbol of India's cultural diversity. And then we talk about the Kalbelia dance associated with Rajasthan, with the snake charming community. Very, very famous. Okay, so it was recently captured at the Rajasthan International Folk Festival. It is also known as the snake charmer dance, because typically the snake charming, snake keeping community performs this dance, and women are elaborately dressed here, and it also shows a very deep connection with nature, okay, symbolizing the human animal connection. And the tribe as well is known as the Kalbelia tribe, behind whom the name has been taken. In 2010, UNESCO had extended its identification, recognition to this dance form, and now it is one of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity coming from India. Now we talk about the Chandubi festival related to Assam. Now in Assam we have a very famous lake called the Chandubi Lake. So therefore the name Chandubi festival, celebrated typically on the New Year's Day near the Chandubi Lake in Assam. There's a picture also for you to associate with, and basically the lake is a lake that was created after the earthquake of 1897, and today it's a very picturesque touristic spot as well. And the aim is to promote ecotourism, essentially to showcase the beauty of Assam's ecology, the biodiversity in front of the global community. And tribe specific folk dances, if we talk about, then in this festival there are various local tribes like the Garo, Boro and Hajpong, Bihu and the Rabha, which come and perform elaborate folk dances. There is of course traditions, there are folklores associated with the entire custom. And eventually we talk about the Sangeet Natak Academy, which has revived and given recognition to an ancient theatrical performance of India known as the Tholu Bommalata puppetry style, which is almost on the brink of elapsing. It was completely extincting. But then now with the initiatives of the Sangeet Natak Academy, this puppetry style is once again gaining prominence. And this is a puppet show style from Andhra Pradesh. And in 2008, it was in the village of Nimalkunta of Andhra Pradesh that this style was awarded the geographical or the GI tag index. And let's remember, it originated in the Satvahana period. Now Satvahana was also very famous for its coins and temple style and pillar inscriptions. So let's remember that even this puppetry style is hailing from that period itself. So with that, we've had a very comprehensive coverage of various art, architecture, dance, music styles across India. Not only is this a depiction of the polycultural society that we are, but also from the perspective of the UPSC exam, I think any relevant point could be picked up in the form of a question, because all these have been in the news. So a very good idea could be seeing the lecture, because it's very visual, so it's easy to remember, re-listening sometimes, or just kind of thinking in your mind, writing down, as I said, using maps that would really help you in a major way. So with this, we come to an end of the session on art and culture, and thank you so much, and tune in, sign in, subscribe for many such more interesting coverages from the perspective of your upcoming UPSC exam. Thank you. Hello, yes sir. Hello.